The fluorescent lights hummed with a faint, electric vibration, a thin, nervous tremor that seemed to echo through the entire mess hall. Rows of sailors and operators sat rigidly at attention, their trays untouched, their hands motionless. No one dared breathe too loudly. Every gaze, hard, sharp, or quietly horrified, was fixed on the woman standing at the head table. Admiral Amanda Hayes didn't move at first. She stood with the stillness of a stone carved by centuries of pressure. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, exposing ink that wasn't decorative but historical coordinates etched like scars, dates stacked like tallies of survival, symbols that only operators with diplomat time could decipher. The tattoos climbed up her arms like vines made of classified stories and ended along the faint line of her neck. The room felt colder around her. Across from her, Ryan Garrett looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. 30 years old, arrogant by habit, confident by default, none of it was visible now. His jaw twitched, a sharp stutter of fear he couldn't suppress. The blood had drained from his face so quickly it was as if someone had pulled a plug. His hands hung at his sides, fingers curled stiffly, nails pressing into his palms. A fork clattered somewhere in the back of the hall. Someone flinched. No one turned to see who it was. Amanda's voice sliced through the tension, controlled and razor-precise, the tone of someone accustomed to delivering life-or-death commands under fire. "These tattoos, Petty Officer Garrett, mark every mission where I brought my team home alive." A slight breath left her nose, measured, steady. 23 years. 27 operations, 0 casualties. The words struck the room like a detonation without sound. Operators who had seen combat couldn't hide the small widening of their eyes. 27 operations with 0 casualties was the kind of statistic whispered about in bars, dismissed as myth, or attributed to units so classified they barely existed in paperwork. Ryan's knees bent involuntarily, a half-buckling motion he caught only because his hand shot to his thigh, gripping the fabric until the seam strained. His breathing turned shallow, the breaths thin and fast. Amanda didn't look away from him. Her eyes were steady, calm in a way that wasn't softness but steel. She didn't blink much. That was what unnerved people, the absolute control. "But to understand this moment," she said, her voice lowering just a fraction, the shift subtle enough that only operators trained to catch micro-changes felt the pressure tighten in their chests, "we need to go back 1 week. A single heartbeat past, to a diner, another heartbeat, to the day you made your biggest mistake." A murmur of air moved through the room, not a sound, just the collective tightening of throats. Ryan didn't move, couldn't. His jaw flexed again, a rapid twitch beneath the skin. The corner of his right eye trembled, a tick born of adrenaline and dread. Amanda's expression didn't change, not a smirk, not a gloat, no triumph. Only the quiet professionalism she was known for, a composure sharpened by decades of command decisions where hesitation cost lives. Behind her, the American flag hung motionless, the fabric heavy. The stainless steel countertops reflected the overhead lights in harsh white streaks. The entire space felt like a stage frozen in time. Amanda finally stepped away from the table, her boots striking the floor with precise, even impact. Each footfall sounded louder than it should have, as if the room had swallowed every ambient noise to amplify her presence. Ryan swallowed once, the sound was almost audible in the silence. She stopped, turned her head slightly toward the rows of personnel. Her stare remained unbroken, an unspoken message that the events leading to this moment were not random, not accidental, and not going to be forgotten. And with that, the trapdoor of the past swung open. 7 days earlier, Rosie's Diner sat half awake under the pale Coronado morning, its neon sign flickering like a tired pulse trying to stay alive. Inside, the red vinyl booths held the quiet history of locals who'd eaten thousands of breakfasts there. Grease clung permanently to the air. The coffee tasted like burned rubber left to lawn on a stove coil. It wasn't a place for tourists. It was a place for people who worked with their hands, who woke before dawn, who understood silence. The bell over the door chirped once as Ryan Garrett pushed inside. He didn't just enter, he occupied the space. Marcus, Trent, and Deshawn followed behind him, the 4 of them moving with the kind of synchronized swagger that didn't need rehearsal. Their laughter hit the room like a thrown object, too loud, too sharp, slicing through the morning calm. They wore Navy SEAL insignia on their jackets, the trident stitched in muted gold. Even out of uniform, their posture screamed operator. Broad shoulders, hard edges, eyes that scanned corners automatically. They carried their status like ballistic plates. Heavy, rigid, and meant to remind everyone around them who they were. Ryan spotted her first. Amanda Hayes sat tucked into a corner booth, the morning sun catching the edge of her coffee cup. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple gray t-shirt, worn jeans, and hair pulled back in a no-nonsense twist. Her tattoos, coordinates, sigils, pieces of a life only operators recognized were visible from wrist to mid-bicep, his eyes narrowed, pupils adjusting. A slow curl tugged at the corner of his mouth, the kind of smirk that never meant anything good. He nudged Marcus with his elbow, a quick jab. "Check out Grandma over there," he said, voice pitched just high enough to travel. "Someone tell her the biker rally was last week." Marcus snorted. Trent barked a laugh. Deshaun shook his head once, a grin pulling at his lips. The kind of pack laughter that was less about the joke and more about the ritual. Amanda didn't look up, but her knife paused for half a second mid-cut, barely perceptible before she resumed slicing her omelet with meticulous precision. Her friends, to civilian women in their 50s, continued talking. One gestured with her fork, mid-story. The other dabbed her lips with a napkin. They didn't notice the shift in the room, but Amanda's jaw tightened, a small contraction just below her ear. A micro-reflex, the only tell that she'd heard every word. Ryan saw that tiny reaction. And like always, that was enough to provoke him further. His pattern never changed. Find a target he assumed was harmless, someone out of their depth, someone who wouldn't fight back. Humiliation wasn't an accident for him, it was a sport. The kind of behavior men learn when no one higher in the chain ever holds them accountable. He rolled his shoulders once, cracked his knuckles with unnecessary volume, and started moving. The sound of his boots crossing the old tile floor made the entire diner shift. Conversations thinned. A spoon stopped stirring coffee. The waitress behind the counter tracked him with her eyes, but didn't intervene. Everyone knew the type: young, confident, adored by the Navy, convinced nothing in the world could check him. He couldn't keep still, his fingers tapped against his thigh fast, impatient. His jaw clicked once as he clenched it. The adrenaline wasn't from fear, it was from anticipation. The pre-conflict high he mistook for power. As he approached, Amanda's friends finally noticed the shift. One paused mid-sentence, her fork hovering in the air. The other looked over her shoulder, confusion tightening her brow, but Amanda didn't react. Her breathing stayed steady, shoulders relaxed. Posture neutral, too neutral. Ryan reached the edge of her table. He planted one hand on the booth's frame, leaning in slightly. Not touching her, just close enough to violate the invisible perimeter every operator subconsciously maintains. He opened his mouth to speak, the smirk was already forming. Ryan's shadow cut across Amanda's plate like an eclipse sharp edge, intrusive, intentional. He anchored himself beside her booth with the confidence of a man who had never been challenged by anyone who mattered. His stance widened slightly, boots angled outward, a posture that tried to project dominance. The subtle bounce of his knee betrayed a cocktail of adrenaline and anticipation. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone coated in a syrupy, artificial politeness. He leaned in just enough to make his presence unavoidable. "I've got to ask, why are you covered in tattoos, Grandma?" Behind him, the other three SEALs exploded in laughter. Not full-hearted laughter, sharp bursts, loud and crude. Marcus slapped Trent on the shoulder. Deshaun shook his head once, the corner of his mouth twitching up before he smothered it. Their amusement bounced off the chrome surfaces and cracked linoleum, filling the diner with something acidic. Amanda's friends went still. One of them, the woman with the pink scarf, opened her mouth as if to intervene. But Amanda lifted a hand, the gesture small and controlled. A command without force, a signal that she didn't need rescuing. She placed her fork down with surgical precision, no clatter. No abrupt motion, just a quiet, deliberate release. Then she reached for her napkin, dabbing at the corner of her mouth as though she were preparing to address a waiter, not a hostile SEAL. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes didn't flash with anger. They carried the calm weight of someone who had delivered casualty reports to families, who had ordered men into gunfire, who had spent nights in TOCs illuminated only by screens reporting troop movements. There was depth behind her gaze, classified depth. Because I earned every single one of them, petty officer. Ryan's smile faltered before he could stop it. The muscles around his mouth twitched. A quick confusion flickered across his eyes, as if she had reached inside his chest and tugged something loose. Teddy off, how did you? Second class, she continued, her voice precise, almost clinical. Judging by the tan line on your ring finger where you took off your wedding band before walking in here, the haircut, the posture, the trident tattoo on your forearm that you got the day you graduated, Bud. Ryan instinctively covered his forearm, fingers brushing the ink. His pulse jumped at the exposed detail. Amanda didn't react to his discomfort. She simply continued, her tone steady, your naval special warfare. And you clearly have no idea who you're speaking to. A flush crept up Ryan's neck, starting at his collar and blooming across his cheeks. Anger, humiliation, and panic mixed in the way operators feared most loss of control. His right hand curled into a half fist he pretended was casual. His jaw flexed, a quick, sharp grind of teeth. Listen, Lady Admiral. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Admiral Amanda Hayes, Naval Special Warfare Command. The words hit the table like a gavel, a fork dropped somewhere behind the counter. The waitress froze mid-pour, coffee overflowing onto the saucer. A construction worker in a booth near the window stopped chewing altogether. You have 3 seconds, Amanda continued, to return to your table before I make this a very different kind of conversation. There was no threat in her tone, only certainty. The certainty of rank, of authority, of someone who could end a career with one phone call. Ryan inhaled sharply through his nose, but the breath caught halfway, turning into a shallow, ragged pull. He stepped back to fast his boot catching the leg of a chair. The metal screeched as it scraped the floor, and he stumbled, arms tensing as he scrambled to keep from falling. His team wasn't laughing anymore. Marcus stared at the salt shaker like it had suddenly become fascinating. Trent kept adjusting the Velcro on his watch strap, over and over. Deshaun's thumb dragged across his phone screen. In a loop, the screen dark, he wasn't even scrolling. Ryan retreated to their booth, his face a storm of red and white patches. Shame radiated off him in waves, hot and disorganized. Amanda picked up her fork again, her movements fluid. She continued eating as though nothing had happened, as though she hadn't just dismantled ASEAL in public using nothing but observation and rank. But in that calm exterior, something sharpened. She took one more sip of her coffee, eyes lowering to her plate, but her attention had shifted entirely. She had memorized his face, his gait. The slight uneven were on his boots, the shape of his name tag. His reactions, everything, because she already knew this wasn't over. The transfer orders had arrived in a crisp manila envelope stamped with the blue crest of Naval Special Warfare. Ryan tore it open at his kitchen counter, the paper shaking slightly in his hands, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. A new assignment meant new visibility, a chance to prove he wasn't just another operator grinding through rotations. Building 618 command operations. People didn't get stationed there by accident. He reread the orders twice, his pulse ticking up with each line. Coronado again, higher level ops. More proximity to leadership, his kind of opportunity. 5 days later, he walked across the naval amphibious space with a sharp stride, boots hitting the pavement in a steady cadence. His uniform looked freshly pressed, though he'd spent half the night reheating it with a travel iron. He carried his confidence the way he carried his gear, visible, intentional. He reached the operations briefing room before most of the others, slipping through the heavy door with practiced ease. The air hit him immediately, brewed coffee so strong it could erode metal, a hint of solvent, and that faint burn of gunpowder drifting over from the SEAL range nearby. Operators smelled it like civilians smelled rain. 15 SEALs were already seated in tight rows of metal chairs. Some leaned back with arms folded across their chests. Others hunched over notepads, tapping pens in restless patterns. A few greeted Ryan with nods, short, professional acknowledgments. One of them gestured at an empty seat. Ryan took it, leaning back with a casual confidence he hoped looked natural. He bounced a knee lightly, trying to burn off the excess energy. His transfer was a step up, or real step up. This was where strategies were shaped, not just missions executed. He imagined himself climbing this chain, becoming someone whose name carried weight. The door at the front of the room opened. He didn't expect the sudden shift in temperature. He didn't expect his breathing to snag halfway in his chest. Admiral Amanda Hayes walked in. She entered like she had been carved from the corridor itself, decisive steps, tablet tucked under one arm, her other hand gripping a black coffee mug that read "Death Before Decaf" in stark white font. Her uniform sleeves were rolled just high enough to reveal the edges of her ink, those geometric lines and coordinates that once made him laugh. Now, they made the room feel smaller. She set the mug down on the briefing table with deliberate precision. Not loud, not soft measured, the kind of movement that carried intent more than sound. Ryan felt a cold wash slide down his spine. His posture straightened automatically, the muscles between his shoulder blades tightening. His left eyelid twitched once, a barely noticeable microspasm. Her eyes found him instantly. Not a hunt, not a search. Just recognition, clean and exact. For a half second, something unreadable flickered behind her gaze. Not surprise. Amanda Hayes was above surprise. It was more like a page turning in her mind. Oh, it's him. She lifted her tablet, tapped a command on the screen, then addressed the room. "Good morning, gentlemen." Her tone was crisp, clipped, and controlled, the way operators speak. "KIN-TOC at 0300 when clarity matters more than warmth." The kind of voice that demanded stillness without ever asking for it. "I'm Admiral Hayes. I'll be your commanding officer for the duration of the Pacific Theater exercises." A rustle passed through the room, posture adjustments, boots planted more firmly, a suppressed cough somewhere near the back. Operators knew the weight of that assignment. These were not routine drills. Pacific Theater meant readiness, it meant scrutiny. "Some of you I know," she continued, eyes sweeping the room. "Some of you I'm about to get to know very well." Her gaze stopped on Ryan. It held. 1 second. 2. 3. He felt every muscle in his body lock in microscopic increments. His jaw clenched. A faint pulse jumped at his temple. He kept his face neutral, but the tension radiated just beneath the skin like a wire stretched too tight. Amanda didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply acknowledged him the same way she acknowledged everything else, directly, professionally, without hesitation. Then she turned her attention back to the group. "Let's get started." She tapped the tablet. The room's main screen came to life with a satellite map of the Pacific, coded with red and blue markers. Ryan swallowed, but the motion caught halfway, turning into a shallow hitch. He knew, with absolute clarity, that whatever happened next would determine the trajectory of his career. Fate or coincidence, it didn't matter. Amanda Hayes was his CEO now, and she remembered everything. Ryan stood at attention beside his table, boots locked, shoulders square, jaw clenched so tightly a vein pulsed along the side of his neck. The inspection bay inside Building 618 felt colder than usual, overhead lights humming with that sterile, merciless spike glow that revealed every flaw, every lapse, every imperfection. Rows of SEALs waited beside their gear layouts, everything arranged with mathematical precision on the concrete floor. Carbines, optics, comms, IFAKs, hydration systems, blades, smoke, demo. Amanda walked the line with silent, unhurried steps, the kind that belonged to someone who had spent decades mastering the economy of movement. She wore no expression, only that sharp, analytical stillness of someone accustomed to reading men under pressure. Every time she stopped, someone's breath hitched, someone blinked too fast. Someone unclenched and reclenched their fist. 2 days. That was all it had taken for her presence to alter the entire command climate. Operators who normally joked through inspections now stood with their spines ramrod straight, eyes fixed forward, hands pressed against their thighs. No one wanted to give her cause to pause, to look closer, to think. Ryan tracked her approach from the edge of his peripheral vision. His pulse spiked despite his best efforts. He forced himself to breathe slow, controlled, as if trying to trick his own nervous system into forgetting what had happened at the diner. Into forgetting the look in her eyes when she recognized him in the briefing room. He told himself he had nothing to fear. His gear was perfect. It always was. Amanda reached the SEAL beside him, checked the man's carbine, nodded once, and moved on. Ryan held his breath for half a second, just long enough for the quiet click of her boots to stop right in front of him. She looked down at his layout as if memorizing a map before crossing hostile ground. Petty Officer Garrett, your IFAC." The words landed like a command detonator. Ryan passed her the individual first aid kit with steady hands to steady. The kind of steadiness that only came from effort. Amanda accepted it, her fingers brushing the reinforced nylon. Her gaze didn't leave his face at first. She studied him the way a surgeon studies a patient who insists nothing is wrong. Then she unzipped the kit, slow, precise, surgical. The IFAK opened like a confession. Amanda went through each item with systematic thoroughness: chest seals, combat gauze, NPA, decompression needle, hemostatic agents. She said nothing, not a twitch in her jaw, not a shift in her breathing. Only when she reached the cat tourniquet did her motion stop. She lifted it between two gloved fingers, turning it slightly toward the overhead lights. The faint cracks along the strap surface were visible now, hairline fractures from UV exposure. "When was this last inspected?" Ryan swallowed. 3 months ago, ma'am." Amanda didn't sigh, didn't glare, didn't raise her voice. That made it worse. Her silence carved through the room. Department of Defense protocol requires monthly inspection for deployed units. She rotated the tourniquet again. This would fail under field conditions. Something in Ryan's chest tightened, like he'd taken a shot without armor. His jaw shifted by a millimeter, barely perceptible, but she saw it. She saw everything. This could cost someone their life. A ripple moved down the line, micro-movements from men who knew exactly what that sentence meant. No one dared look at him. Ryan's face went hot. "Ma'am, you're grounded from the next training exercise." The words landed with the weight of an aircraft carrier. "You will spend the time recertifying your medical equipment with the hospital corpsman." She set the degraded tourniquet on his table, not as a reprimand, more like a piece of evidence. Dismissed, Ryan stepped back, boots scraping the concrete. His throat tightened. He kept his face neutral, at least. He tried. A muscle near his left eye spasmed, a small involuntary twitch he couldn't suppress. No one laughed. That was the brutal part. No snickering, no sideways smirks. The silence from the other operators carried something heavier: respect for her, and the subtle, razor-thin shame of his mistake. As Amanda moved on, Ryan understood something he'd never confronted before. She wasn't punishing him, she was measuring him. Holding him to the standard he claimed to own. The kind of accountability that leaves no bruises, only truth. And truth burned deeper than any reprimand. The Pacific looked like a sheet of obsidian hammered flat by some ancient four-snow moon. No reflection, only the impression of depth that swallowed sound and light alike. The air smelled faintly of kelp and diesel from the safety boats idling in the distance. Operators moved along the dock with quiet efficiency, checking dive computers, pressure gauges, fins, and comms. The only illumination came from red-lensed headlamps that cast long shadows across the planks. Ryan tightened the straps on his rucksack until they bit into his shoulders. The weight felt grounding, almost stabilizing. He needed that tonight. A week had passed since the equipment inspection, 7 days of staying late, recalibrating gear, cross-training with corpsman, and keeping his head down. No swagger, no jokes, just the grind, but he never knew whether she noticed. Amanda stood farther down the dock, speaking quietly with a group of instructors, her posture straight, hands clasped behind her back. Even in the darkness she carried that same stillness, like a perimeter sensor keyed to the slightest deviation. Ryan forced himself not to look at her too long. He checked his dive partner's gear instead. Collins, new to the teams, fresh edges, bright eyes, jaw that still held the softness of youth. He adjusted the seal on his mask with hands that trembled just enough to show he was trying to hide the tremble. "You good?" Ryan asked, keeping his voice level. Collins nodded quickly. "Good, Petty Officer. Just first night dive outside training pipeline." Ryan gave one curt nod. "Stay on my fins. No hero moves, we keep a clean line, we make time." Collins's exhale fogged the inside of his mask for half a second before clearing. When the instructor signaled them forward, pairs of divers slipped silently into the black water. The cold hit immediately, compressing around the ribs, tightening muscles, demanding calm. Ryan and Collins submerged together, descending until the world became weightlessness and vibration. Their dive lights stayed off. This was pure navigation compass, depth gauge, strokes counted inside the mind. The darkness moved around them like a living thing. Every breath through the regulator echoed louder than it should. Halfway through the ascent to kilometers, Collins's silhouette jerked. His hand shot out an urgent, unmistakable signal: regulator failure. His eyes widened behind the mask, the white stark even in the muted darkness. A microspasm flickered at the corner of his eye, panic trying to claw its way in. Ryan reacted before conscious thought caught up. Muscle memory, years of drills, instinct sharpened by repetition. He pressed his own regulator into Collins's hand, took the backup, locked his legs to stabilize them both. Collins's breaths came fast at first, too fast, but Ryan placed a firm palm against the younger man's shoulder, grounding him. Breathe slow. Follow my lead. They ascended in a controlled rise, the ocean thinning from absolute black to a muted, grainy charcoal. When they broke the surface, Collins gasped against the regulator, the sound ragged but alive. Ryan kept a hard grip on him to maintain buoyancy. The safety boat cut toward them, its spotlight slicing across the waves. Two crewmen hauled Collins aboard first, Ryan climbing up behind him. Amanda was waiting on the dock, not pacing, not alarmed. Just waiting, hands clasped behind her back, the faint glow of the tactical floodlights tracing the hard lines of her jaw. She approached Collins first. Her fingertips moved with clinical precision as she checked his pulse, pupil response, breathing pattern. Her voice stayed low. Professional. Regulator malfunction. Yes, Admiral, Collins managed, still slightly breathless. You handled the emergency ascent well. Go with the corpsman for evaluation. Collins left with quick, stumbling steps, still rattled. Then Amanda turned to Ryan. The pause before she spoke wasn't dramatic, it wasn't heavy, it was evaluative. You did well tonight, Garrett, that was solid field work. For a moment, he forgot how to respond. His throat worked around the words before they finally came out. Thank you, Mom, but it doesn't erase the pattern. A faint tightening appeared at the edge of his jaw, a half-second clench he couldn't hide. Pattern. Ma'am. Amanda lifted her tablet, swiped once, twice. The blue glow washed across her face. I've been reviewing your file. 7 incidents in 18 months. Ryan felt the muscles between his shoulder blades lock. Complaints from junior personnel about hostile work environment. His fingers curled slightly around the strap of his rucksack. 2 investigations for hazing dismissed due to insufficient evidence. A heat spread along the back of his neck. 3 formal reprimands for conduct unbecoming. He inhaled through his nose, controlled, but too sharp. Those were dismissed, he began. Because you're good at what you do, Amanda said. No accusation, just fact, because the teams protect their own. Because no one wanted to be the one to end the career of a decorated operator. She stepped closer, the distance between them collapsing to something uncomfortably honest. But being good at your job doesn't give you the right to make everyone around you miserable. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just truth. A truth that hit harder than anything she'd said before. Amanda turned and walked toward the operations building, boots striking the dock with even cadence, no hesitation, no need to look back. Ryan remained exactly where she left him, wetsuit dripping, regulator hanging limp at his side. The ocean behind him was silent. The night air pressed cold against his skin. For the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of something he couldn't fight, couldn't outrun, couldn't brute force into submission, something like consequence. The request for a private meeting came through official channels, it carried the unmistakable tremor of fear embedded between the lines. To junior SEALs men who could fast rope into hostile terrain, under fire without flinching, waited outside Amanda's office with their shoulders drawn tight and their eyes avoiding every passing glance. They stood at attention when she opened the door, but their postures betrayed something raw, bracing, as if stepping into a blast radius. Amanda motioned them inside. The door clicked shut behind them with a soft, final sound. They spoke quietly at first, too quietly. One of the men kept rubbing the inside of his thumb with the edge of his forefinger, a repetitive, unconscious movement that only surfaced when someone was trying to lock down nerves. The other blinked too frequently, each blink longer than the last, as if fighting the impulse to look at the floor. When they finally said Ryan's name, their voices wavered. They described what he'd been running, not officially, never officially. No signatures on training memos, no chain of command authorization. nothing traceable to the system he knew how to manipulate. He called it tradition, rite of passage, team bonding. The words were always framed with humor, the kind that shut down objections by making dissent look fragile. But the details were unmistakable. Push-ups until arms failed, then vomit hit the deck. Forced exposure to cold water beyond safe time limits. Sleep deprivation masked as night readiness drills. Public humiliation disguised as building resilience. None of it had been formally reported. The junior men weren't naive, they knew what retaliation looked like in tight units, where power wasn't always written on paper. One of them swallowed hard when he admitted why they finally came forward. They weren't as afraid of Ryan hurting them as they were of what he would do to the next group. Amanda listened, no interruptions, no softening reactions. Her eyes stayed steady on them, absorbing every detail. She took notes the way she used to in forward operating bases years ago, short, precise, no wasted motion. She kept her breathing quiet and even, giving them space to speak without influence or intimidation. When they finished, relief and dread tangled across their faces like conflicting tides. Amanda closed her notebook. Thank you, both of you. What you've done today took courage. The one with the blinking problem finally looked up. He held her gaze for half a second, then nodded. When they left her office, she didn't stand for several minutes. She remained at her desk, fingertips pressed lightly against the closed notebook, exhaling once through her nose in a controlled release. Not frustration, not surprise. Just confirmation. She already suspected. Now she had direction. She began the investigation the same way she once dismantled enemy logistics chains in Helmand Province, quietly, methodically, one verifiable thread at a time. First, personnel interviews, calm, informal conversations that never telegraphed purpose. She watched posture, tone, micro-hesitations in their answers. Some SEALs defended Ryan reflexively too quickly. Others chose their words with the careful avoidance of men who had seen too much and wanted no part in it. A few spoke plainly, but only after she reassured them the conversation was confidential. Second, training logs. She combed through timestamps, location records, environmental conditions. Certain after-hours drills repeated at irregular intervals, times when no drills had been authorized. Third, equipment sign-out sheets. She cross-referenced reports of accidents with the checkout records. Cold water gear signed out on nights with no maritime training scheduled. Medical equipment checked back in with inconsistencies, missing packets, saline used in suspicious quantities. The pattern emerged, not as a guess but as a structure, a system. A program Ryan had built in the shadows, protected by his reputation and by the unwritten rule that the teams handled their own. He was good at the job, yes, good in the field. But he had learned to weaponize that competence, using it as armor to conceal behavior that would have ended any other operator's career before it began. Ryan Garrett wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. And worse, he had been dangerous for a long time. Amanda closed the last file late at night, the operations building nearly silent except for the distant hum of Vic and the occasional metallic pop of cooling metal. She stood at the window overlooking the training compound, hands clasped behind her back, a posture that was becoming more and more automatic as she shifted deeper into command mode. The decision formed with the clarity of a sharpened blade. She wasn't going to reprimand Ryan, not yet. She wasn't going to confront him in a hallway or pull him aside after a drill. He had spent years demanding attention through force, intimidation, and spectacle. Very well. She would give him what he had been asking for all along, an audience. 3 weeks passed, each one marked by a subtle tightening in Ryan's posture and a growing shine of confidence he wore like polished brass. The base's quarterly award ceremony approached with the slow weight of something monumental, something he had convinced himself he deserved. Dressed whites, full honors, families on base, exactly the kind of environment where reputations were cemented and future assignments were whispered about in corners. Ryan had been informed he would receive formal commendation for the night dive rescue. A textbook operation, they told him, heroic, the kind of act that made selection boards look twice. He was told to prepare remarks. He took that instruction seriously. For days, he stood in front of the mirror in his barracks room, rehearsing lines he imagined would echo across the auditorium. Words like brotherhood, duty, the sacred trust of the teams. He adjusted his jawline, practiced the solemn nod of a man who understood sacrifice. He even practiced micro-pauses, the kind of beat that made audiences lean forward. This would be his moment, a reset, a clean slate. Confirmation that he belonged on the fast track. The morning of the ceremony, Ryan arrived early. Too early, the kind of early that exposed his eagerness. His dressed whites were flawless, creases sharp enough to cut through inspection. He checked his reflection in a window, smoothing the front of his jacket, tightening the knot of his neckerchief with one last satisfied tug. His smile, when he tried it, was measured, professional, stoic, camera-ready. By the time guests began streaming in, he was already positioned near the stage entrance, standing at parade rest, but with feet so rigidly planted they betrayed the electric anticipation coursing through him. Inside the auditorium, rows filled with uniforms and civilians. Families with children craning to see the stage, spouses whispering quietly. Distinguished guests seated in the front, a rear admiral from SOCOM with a face carved from granite, to congressmen murmuring to aides, to base commander reviewing a printed program. When Admiral Amanda Hayes stepped onto the stage, the entire room shifted subtly, an almost imperceptible tightening, or realignment of attention. Her presence had that effect, dress whites pristine, gold braid catching the overhead lights with sharp highlights. The tattoos at her wrists and collarbone were visible, coordinates, dates, a few symbols unreadable to most but unmistakably earned. She greeted the room with a nod, not a smile. Her voice was steady, authoritative, carrying the clarity of someone who had spoken in war rooms, briefing tents, and command centers in more countries than most people could name. She began with the junior personnel recognitions. One by one, she called them forward young sailors, nervous around the cameras, standing small beside her towering record of combat and command. She handed out commendations with crisp professionalism, offering each recipient the quiet word only they could hear. Ryan watched from the wings, his chin lifted, hands folded behind his back. His breathing was controlled, though the slightest flare in his nostrils revealed the adrenaline spiking beneath the surface. Then his name cut through the speakers, Petty Officer Ryan Gareth. He stepped onto the stage with a practiced stride. Not too slow, not too fast, he shook Amanda's hand grip firm, measured. He faced the audience with the posture of a man who believed he was finally being seen the way he deserved. Amanda held the commendation certificate in one hand but did not offer it. Not immediately, she spoke to the audience, projecting effortlessly. Petty Officer Garrett rescued a teammate during a training accident 3 weeks ago, she began. His quick thinking and adherence to safety protocols prevented what could have been a tragedy. Ryan felt his lungs expand, chest swelling slightly as if to fill the space around him. He kept his expression composed, but a faint, controlled exhale betrayed satisfaction. Amanda continued. However, she said, her tone shifting with surgical precision, leadership isn't defined by single moments. The faint smile Ryan had been holding froze, mid-formation. It's defined, she said, by patterns. Ryan's jaw locked so subtly only a train I could see the muscle tighten near his ear. His breathing paused for half a second, just long enough to reveal the fault line beginning to form beneath the surface. Amanda didn't look at him, not yet. She looked at the room. And the trap she had spent weeks constructing began to close. Amanda didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. The authority in her posture, shoulders squared, chin level, breath steady, carried farther than any amplification system. The commendation certificate stayed in her left hand, perfectly still, while her right hand remained relaxed at her side, fingers lightly curled with the control of someone who'd spent a lifetime mastering her own reactions. Ryan stood beside her, a rigid silhouette, his jaw set in a smile that had frozen into a grimace. 4 weeks ago, she said, turning toward the audience with precise, measured movement, Petty Officer Garrett approached me, his civilian diner. A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. Not a sound, just the subtle shift of shoulders, the slow exhale of people realizing the trajectory of this moment was no longer the one they expected. He didn't know who I was, Amanda continued. He saw an older woman with tattoos and decided she was an appropriate target for mockery. Her eyes didn't move to Ryan, but his eyelid twitched, a quick, involuntary flutter. He asked me, in front of my friends and other patrons, "Why are you covered in tattoos, Grandma?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air felt suspended, like it refused to move in the presence of what was unfolding. A congressman in the front row shifted in his seat. A junior enlisted sailor swallowed, hard enough that the movement of his throat was visible from 10 feet away. "I'd like to answer that question now," Amanda said softly, publicly. "Because I think everyone here deserves to know what these tattoos mean." She rolled up her sleeve with controlled precision, not a dramatic gesture, but a deliberate one. The ink, normally glimpsed only in the small spaces between her cuffs and gloves, traced across her forearm like a classified map. "These coordinates mark Operation Neptune Spear." A few gasps, a whispered Jesus. Someone in the second row blinked rapidly, processing the weight of what that meant. "These dates are Kandahar Province, 2011, she touched the numbers with 2 fingers, the gesture almost reverent. "This symbol is for the 3 sailors I pulled from a burning vehicle in Ramadi. This one is for the team I led through a compromised exfiltration in Yemen." Each point was precise, her voice unwavering. She didn't brag, she didn't dramatize. She simply stated the truth, each fact landing like a controlled detonation. 23 years, 47 combat deployments. Ryan's shoulders jerked almost imperceptibly. He bragged about 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Navy Cross, someone in the crowd inhaled sharply. And 0 tolerance for bullies who hide behind a trident while violating everything it stands for. Ryan's face had gone through a full spectrum, first flushed crimson, then pale, and now an ashen gray that settled into the hollows of his cheeks. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. His hands remained locked at his sides, fingers pressing hard enough against his seams that the knuckles whitened. Amanda opened a folder with the same precision she'd use handling classified documents. "Over the past month, I've documented 17 separate incidents of Petty Officer Garrett engaging in hazing, harassment, and conduct unbecoming of naval special warfare personnel." The Rear Admiral from SOCOM leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The congressman traded glances. "I have sworn statements from 8 junior operators." She lifted a page. "I have medical records showing injuries sustained during unofficial training." Ryan swallowed. It was audible. Amanda stepped off the podium platform and handed the folder directly to the Rear Admiral. He accepted it with a grim set to his jaw, flipping the first page before she'd even returned to her position. "Petty Officer Garrett," she said, meeting Ryan's eyes for the first time since the ceremony began, "you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation and court-martial proceeding." A barely perceptible tremor moved through Ryan's lower lip. His breath hitched, chest rising too quickly, like his lungs had forgotten their rhythm. "Master at Arms," Amanda said, "please escort him from the premises." Two uniformed security personnel approached with measured, respectful steps, the kind reserved for removing someone whose career had just died but whose dignity didn't need to be further shredded. Ryan didn't resist. His left hand twitched once, a reflexive clench of a fist quickly released. He stared straight ahead as they positioned themselves on either side of him. The walk out of the auditorium felt longer than any forced march. Every eye followed him. No one spoke. The door closed behind him. Silence held. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. One person, in the far right row, another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was standing applauding, not in celebration of Ryan's downfall, but in acknowledgement of the integrity it had taken for Amanda to do what no one else had dared. Amanda didn't smile, she didn't bow, she simply stood there, steady as bedrock, the embodiment of the ethos carved into her skin. 3 months later, Naval Special Warfare Command moved with the kind of efficiency reserved for cases where the evidence didn't bend, didn't blur, didn't leave room for interpretation. Ryan Garrett's court-martial lasted for days, long enough for the judge advocates to present a timeline so precise it read like an operations plan. Witness statements corroborated one another without contradiction, medical records aligned with duty logs. Video evidence from security cameras in the training compound sealed gaps with brutal clarity. Ryan sat stiffly through the proceedings, his posture collapsing a little more each day. The first morning, he kept his shoulders squared, chin up, jaw locked as if holding a formation. By the second afternoon, his hands trembled whenever he reached for a glass of water. On the final day, when the verdict was delivered, his pupils constricted, and a faint pulse beat visibly at his temple, a metronome of disbelief and dread. Dishonorable discharge, loss of all veteran benefits, immediate revocation of his trident, permanent ban from all U.S. military installations. The moment the insignia was removed from his uniform, his breath caught a sharp, involuntary intake as though the air itself had turned heavier. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't deny. He only stared straight ahead, eyes glassy and unfocused, like a man watching the wreckage of his life drift to the ocean floor. Meanwhile, the two junior SEALs who had reported him faced a different destiny. Their promotions were processed within weeks. Their service records updated with commendations citing integrity, under pressure, and commitment to Navy core values. Amanda wrote both recommendations by hand, no templates, no delegated signatures. Each line carried her meticulous pen strokes, deliberate and unmistakable. She knew young operators could feel when a superior had written something out of duty versus conviction. She intended them to feel the latter. Across the base, the diner incident evolved into something beyond a story, not gossip, not a punchline. It became a cautionary doctrine, repeated in briefings, leadership seminars, even informal mentorship sessions around steel tables in team rooms. Don't judge what you don't understand. Don't assume rank gives you the right to cruelty. Don't confuse toughness with arrogance. By the time winter slipped into early spring, Amanda found herself drawn back to Rosie's diner on a quiet Saturday morning, the same day, the same hour when everything had first unfolded. The bell above the door chimed softly, the familiar scent of fresh coffee and griddled butter drifted through the warm air. Her friends were already in the booth. Same cracked leather seats, same chit formica tabletop, same sunlight streaming over the windows like a bright, forgiving spotlight. When she slid into the booth, the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease, by degrees, replaced by a grounded calm she hadn't felt in months. The waitress approached with the steady confidence of someone who recognized her instantly. She placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of Amanda before a single word was exchanged. "On the house, Admiral," she said, a quiet respect threading through her voice. "We heard what you did." Amanda closed her hand around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her palm. A small, controlled breath left her lungs, relief, subtle and measured. She offered the waitress a genuine smile, the first unguarded one she'd allowed herself since the investigation began. "Just doing my job." Her friend across the table leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the edge. His eyes drifted to the ink on her forearm, partially visible beneath the crisp fold of her sleeve. "Those tattoos," he said, "they really mean all that?" Amanda lifted her arm, tracing the coordinates with the side of her thumb. The memory behind each symbol flickered across her face in tiny, nearly imperceptible shifts, the tightening of her jaw at one date, the softening of her gaze at another. "Every single one," she said, "and I earned the right to wear them anywhere I damn well please." Outside, the California sun climbed steadily, reflecting off the chrome trim of parked cars and warming the sidewalk where early joggers passed. Inside the diner, plates clattered, conversations hummed, and life continued its quiet flow. Justice had been served not loudly, not vindictively, but with the precision of someone who understood the value of accountability. Amanda didn't need applause, she didn't need recognition. She needed only this moment, a booth, a cup of coffee, and the knowledge that she had done what was right. She took another sip, eyes steady, posture relaxed, the embodiment of a life lived under principles that didn't waver with public opinion. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel.